This program is brought to you in part by the Eugenie and Joseph Jones Family Foundation, a local foundation proud to support education, the arts, and culture in the greater New Orleans area.
Support for this program comes from the Gail and Tom Benson Charitable Foundation, committed to funding educational causes.
Hello, I'm Marcia Kavanaugh. Thanks so much for joining us. Well, there is the old election night story about the candidate who was told by an aide that the good news was that he had won the election. The bad news is that now he has to govern. Now it is the time for governing to start. We'll be examining the results from Saturday's election and what we learned about the city and its politics. Joining us are Errol Laborde, producer of Informed Sources, James Finn, staff writer for the Times-Picayune, the New Orleans Advocate, and Robert Collins, Dillard University Urban Studies professor and political analyst for Fox 8 and Verite News. And we go over to E first because now we have Mayor-elect Helena Moreno. The election for mayor is done. It's decided. So how did she do it?
I have this tradition that on big election days, I like to go and drive around town, especially the major thoroughfares, as I did Saturday. I went up Broad, then to Napoleon, then around to St. Charles and Carrollton and all that. And like every stretch of neutral ground, there was Moreno signs. You know, if somebody came into town and didn't know what was going on, they'd say, whoever this Moreno person is, they're pretty well organized. And she was. She had a well-organized sign campaign. And that says something. I mean, signs alone don't get you elected, but it certainly says something about organization. And it says something about money, too. There was something else. This is just a hunch. Her sign, the word Moreno was bold letters. The words Helena was like script, which was to me kind of a more female, elegant thing. And so you saw Helena Moreno, you saw a candidate, and a subtle way of saying it for woman also. And I think the two things really worked out well. But she had just a well-organized campaign. And, you know, people wondered all about the racial factor, and certainly it's a factor. And the black vote's the majority. The white vote is the minority, but it's a big minority. And so she had the backing of a big minority plus some of the black vote, but the majority that she did have was the woman vote. And so she had those combinations that came together. And then, and to a certain extent, what there was the Hispanic vote, she had that. And plus she put on a good campaign. And so all during the time the polls were showing her hovering around 50%. But there were still undecided voters. There were still the other candidates that they couldn't quite do it. But the polls were essentially right. I mean, if you factor everything right, once you eliminated the other candidates and the undecided voters, that she pulled ahead. She pulled ahead early.
Yeah, and so. Yeah, you know, and you're right. Everybody criticizes the polls. Oh, the polls are, you know, there's a hidden vote. Nobody sees the polls. But you have to give the pollsters credit because in this election, the polls were in fact correct. And basically the undecided vote, I argued, you know, from the beginning that generally the undecided vote was going to break proportionally in the direction of the decided vote. And that's basically what happened. I mean, Helena got about half of the undecided vote. It broke in her direction, and that's why she finished so not just ahead on election night, but she finished comfortably ahead. She finished comfortably over 50%.
So there was a good turnout, certainly for early voting. We saw a lot of folks go out for early voting. Overall turnout,
40%, 40.1%. In fact, so on the front on the front page of James's paper on the morning of election, I predicted that there would be over 40% turnout, and I got a lot of heat for that. And people are saying, "Oh, you're crazy. You don't know what you're talking about." Well, it turns out that according to the Secretary of State, turnout in the mayor's race was 40.1%. So by 0.1%,
right.
My prediction was correct. It was over 40%.
And that's of registered voters, right,
Yes.
of the city. So, I mean, it's certainly better than elections past, but it's not
No, it's not.
greatest.
So pre-Katrina, we used to average about 45% turnout. That was the norm pre-Katrina. After Katrina, we went over 40% like once the election right after Katrina. Ever since then, it's been very low. I mean, the last time we had an open seat in 2017 was like 32%. So low 30s has basically been the norm over the past 20 years. So the fact that we got up to 40% is good. Now, ideally, I'd like it to get closer to the pre-Katrina numbers of around 45% because you want people to participate. But but just the fact that we are like eight points higher than the last time we had a vacant mayor's race, I think is good, is an improvement.
What increases turnout the most is when there's an issue that divides the community, when everybody's at odds with each other, which isn't a healthy thing, okay? This wasn't that kind of election. There wasn't anything that really divided. I mean, there was a personality issue, but it wasn't that. The Duke Edwards election, that was a classic example of something that divided the community and people turned out. But it wasn't that people were frightened into going to the polls, that they were just doing it out of civic duty. But I don't know if this ever happened, that we have a governor who was elected in the primary and a mayor who was elected in the primary. And in place of the governor, it was, of course, the Republican majority, and in the case of the mayor, it was a Democratic majority. But the two big winners certainly knew how to put campaigns together.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. We'd have to check the history, but I think you're right. In modern history, that probably hasn't happened, that we've had just right on the heels of a governor winning in the primary, we have a mayor winning in the primary.
Errol, you said that on Election Day you saw such a good organized effort out there of signs for Helena Moreno. Her campaign, though, I've heard it described as flawless. It was just beyond Election Day. She really did run an excellent campaign and was always well financed. She started out really early with that, right?
Yeah. Well, you could argue. So I argued, that basically she's been running for mayor for the past 4 years. As soon as she was reelected to her city council at large position, she immediately started raising money and doing all the things for mayor. One of my colleagues disagreed with me. He says no, she's basically been running for mayor for the last 8 years. So as soon as she was elected to the city council, but of course the best way to run for mayor is, if you're a city council member, is to just do a great job on the city council. If you do a great job on the city council and the voters like you, your constituents like you, they think you're effective, that's really the best campaign ad that you can do.
But anyone who runs for council member at large is doing it with the thought in mind about running for mayor. Okay, I mean, that's why I do it. It's like running for vice president, okay? You want for president. Now, in the case of J.P. Morrell, he thought about it and decided he wouldn't do it, okay? But that's always in the mind of anybody at that level. And truth is, several of our mayors have come from being council member at large. It's just a thing you do if you got it, because you have already a built-in citywide constituency, whereas the district council members don't have that.
So Helena Moreno did it. She did it in the primary, and she had community-wide support. What does her victory really say now about New Orleans politics in general, would you say?
I think a lot of people see it as sort of turning the page. So we're gonna move toward a different sort of type of politics. I think it's going to be less confrontational. Now this is the assumption. We won't really know until until she actually takes office and starts to interact with the city council. But I think, because remember, the previous mayor was a council member also. So simply coming from the council doesn't guarantee that you'll get along with the council.
No, she had big crossover vote in order to take it in the primary too. So what does that say about community politics now?
So if you look at the crossover vote, so Moreno got something like 30% of the black vote, whereas if you look at Duplessis and Oliver Thomas, they each got about 5-6% crossover of the white vote. So she is definitely a candidate that has a broad racial appeal. You know what? So as far as racial dynamics in New Orleans, when Dutch Morial was first elected in the late 70s, people were saying, "Oh, it's a majority black city now. We're never going to see another white mayor. But then, of course, we saw Mitch Landrieu, a white mayor that was elected, and it was elected also in the primary very convincingly with a lot of crossover black vote. And then people said, oh, well, Mitch is an anomaly. He's a Landrieu. His father was a civil rights hero. You can't really generalize based on Mitch. You'll never see another white mayor after Mitch. Well, here we are. We're seeing another white mayor, and the reason is because even though there is still racial voting, people are no longer looking for black voters. Most of them are no longer looking for a black mayor. They're just looking for a good mayor. People want a good mayor, And I mean, listen. And if there are a lot of people, a lot of politicians in this community that, I argued, well, we have to protect the franchise and this and that. A lot of these people are out of touch. They don't go into like poor black neighborhoods. I go into poor black neighborhoods, and I have because I'm interested in because I'm a social scientist, and I've asked poor black folks directly, how is having black mayors in the past 40 years, 50 years, how has it increased your life directly? Just the fact that they're black, and most people would tell you no, it hasn't. Race hasn't really made any difference because they're still poor. Here's what electing black mayors did. Electing black mayors allowed the black college-educated class, people like me, black lawyers, black doctors, black engineers, black construction contractors. It opened up City Hall for them. When Dutch got elected and all the black mayors that came after him, a lot of the black educated class, they got contracts. They got jobs as city attorneys, city contractors. Politics was open to them. A lot of them got elected judges. It was great. But what it didn't do, and statistically, we can prove this statistically, electing black mayors did not really raise up the standard of living and the quality of life of the poor black people in the city of New Orleans. It didn't. Their living conditions are still the same. And so it's a bifurcation. It benefited the upper and middle classes, but not the lower black class. And so my point of all this is to say, people don't want to elect a black mayor just to be electing a black mayor. They want a good mayor. They want a mayor. If I'm if I'm a working class person, it doesn't matter if I'm black, white, purple, green. I want a good mayor who's going to offer me, who's going to have good policies that's going to improve my standard of living for me and my family. It's not the color of their skin.
Just really quickly, if you can touch on this too, because Oliver Thomas certainly had some words of frustration the night of the election, but then softened them in subsequent days. Any comment on that?
Well, I think part of it was just emotional frustration by Oliver. It's important to understand Oliver Thomas has never lost an election in his political career. This is the first loss he's ever had. So I think it was kind of just him striking out. He was striking out at the press, and he said this is the result that they wanted, as if there's a conspiracy. He said, the devil demands 100%, not 99%. I'm not sure who the devil is and who he's referring to, but I think that was just his frustration on election night that he lost his first election. Now, to be fair to Councilman Thomas, he did send an email out the next day to his supporters saying we should say a prayer. We should pray for Mayor-elect Moreno, and we should support her, and we should raise her up and hope that she does a good job as mayor. So I think he softened his position since then.
And we should point out that the two council members, the large, are both black.
Yes.
Okay? And it looks like the council itself will be 6-1. One white, and I guess it depends what you do with Cynthia Nguyen out in East New Orleans, which could be by far a black majority.
And it's now time to talk about that, because we're going over to James to talk about the runoffs now in council seats of District A, E, and then, of course, Court, too. So what are we looking at there?
We're looking at three pretty contentious, closely matched runoffs in E, which we were just talking about. You have Jason Hughes running against Cindy Nguyen. Jason Hughes is a state lawmaker from New Orleans East. He has a lot of political support, very well liked among his colleagues in the legislature. He finished second to Cindy Nguyen, who is a former District E council member and thus has a great deal of name recognition out there, has a resume of representing that seat. And so it'll sort of come down to a battle between Jason's emerging name recognition and the political support he has, and Cindy's resume.
Right, and then another race is certainly one in District A, and this is between the folks who are in the runoff were both staff members, right, for Councilman Giarrusso, who decided not to run for that seat.
That's right. There's Amy McCarran and Holly Friedman, both of whom have previously worked for Councilmember Giarrusso and are now scoring off to lead the district that he is term limited out of at this point.
Go ahead, E.
Sort of the unique fact about District E, though, is that it is a district with the largest Vietnamese population. And so that has been a certain voting bloc that helped Sydney to win in the past. So.
Absolutely, yep.
Okay, and then the other one that's in a runoff here in Orleans is, this was not anticipated, certainly when we started this election cycle, that there would be a contest like this, but it's the clerk of court.
Yes.
So that one, once again, voters will go to the polls in November to make that decision. But in this one, the incumbent, who's Darren Lombard, actually came in 1 point under his opponent.
Yes. This is arguably the most wild race of the cycle. Obviously, the mayoral race commanded a lot of attention, a lot of coverage. But the clerk of criminal courts race, you have an incumbent backed by Congressman Troy Carter and Darren Lombard. And he's facing off against a man who was wrongfully convicted of murder and served 28 years in Angola, Calvin Duncan, and is now campaigning on a promise to modernize and sort of streamline the record system that he says failed him over and over again when he was in prison trying to prove his innocence. Calvin Duncan raised a lot of money in the primary, and Darren Lombard didn't. And sort of towards the end, you saw this onslaught of attacks that Lombard was launching at Duncan in the form of TV commercials, text messages. He even benefited from a letter that Attorney General Liz Murrill, a Republican, sent to Duncan telling him to stop saying that he had been exonerated. And Lombard's sort of line of attack was to try to convince people that Calvin Duncan had lied about his record and had not, in fact, been cleared of the murder he committed. We spoke to a number of lawyers who say that's not the case, that by all accounts, by the court record, Calvin Duncan was found innocent and a judge vacated his sentence as a result of that. There's a letter circulating that now has over 100 signatures from lawyers around Louisiana who've signed on to a statement saying that that's that it is true that Calvin Duncan was exonerated. And political analysts and folks in politics are kind of watching this as it played out down to the wire, and we're going, this was a real strategic misstep by a very powerful incumbent with a lot of political backing to launch this attack that really just flailed and kind of raised his opponent's profile. And then he's now in a runoff with Calvin Duncan after a primary in which Duncan won more votes than him.
Right. So has Lombard sort of backed off now from this line of attack?
In recent days, it's quieted down a little bit, since we're through the primary and we're now looking to the runoff. It's sort of an open question as to what the strategy and the messaging will look like on either side as we head to November.
As you pointed out, Duncan, raised money, and he really did have a lot of TV. Where did this money come from? Do we know? Robert?
Well, so when I pulled his campaign finance report, I pulled both of them, both Lombard's and his, because he actually outraised and outspent Lombard in the final 30 days of the race, and I was curious as to where that money's coming from. A lot of that money is coming from similar groups, similar to our nonprofit here, Project Innocence, that is basically pro bono a legal services group that does work for inmates and exonerates them when they get new evidence. A lot of his money is dark money coming in from criminal justice reform groups, which are national organizations. Most of them are located on the coast, either New York or the East Coast or the West Coast in California. They promote criminal justice reform issues. So obviously he is seen as the criminal justice reform candidate. So he's getting a lot of that dark money from those criminal justice groups from outside of Louisiana, and I predict he's going to outspend Darren Lombard in the runoff.
So we'll be seeing a lot more TV.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yes.
Well, E, let's go on over to you again, because you wanted to discuss some of the changes that have happened now in campaigning.
Yeah. And there's several, but a couple of that come to mind is one, the growing importance of early voting. early voting has been around for a few elections now, but with each time you're seeing it becoming more and more important. And this is taking place what we used to call absentee voting. Right. And it's one thing to say, well, I'm going to be absent, so I got to vote, but to say I want to vote early is more of a positive thing. But that's growing. You can see a lot, and it's going to affect the way that campaigns are run. That people are going to know that they got to make their big move early, that they can't wait until the end, and they really have to have a different strategy. And so early voting is going to really have its impact. The other thing is the growth of social media, especially with Generation Z. That Moreno had a very good social media campaign. There's one organization out there that specializes, and so what you see on Facebook and podcasts, that sort of thing, it's all a part of politics. The other thing that you see less of is, I remember on election day when you'd drive around and you'd see the signs from the black political groups, Bold and Soul and Coup and Tips and all of those. You don't, and Bill Jefferson had his organization. You don't see that anymore, that those organizations aren't as important. Oliver Thomas rose to one of those groups. He came out of the Bold organization, but that's just changing too. And I think it's more of individual liaisons, but it's a different type of politics.
Sure. What's interesting about District B is that used to be the Bold stronghold. And so 4 years ago, Leslie Harris, the current council person, actually knocked off the incumbent, who was a Bold member in District B, Jay Banks. And in this time, even though that's a historic the historic homeland of the Bold organization, they did not even run a candidate against her. So she is unchallenged. And so that just shows you how the black political organizations have fallen off. And I predict they're going to continue to fall off because 3 of the O-line organizations, Tips and Soul and Coup, actually endorsed Royce Duplessis in this election, which was sort of curious because it was obvious to a lot of us that Helena Moreno was going to win, and so late in the game they endorsed Royce. So I'm assuming there's some strategy behind that. I don't know what it is, but it's an interesting strategy. But I predict that the black political organizations will continue to become weaker and lose their power.
And you brought in, I think it was you who brought in the flyer, didn't those 3 organizations
they got
put out a flyer together?
And they put out a unity ticket, which I have never seen in my life. It was very strange because they used to fight with each other for decades. And so it was very strange. And then they endorsed Duplessis. So I don't know. Maybe they have some business coming up in the state legislature, because it's important for people to remember Royce Duplessis is still an incumbent state senator. And people were wondering why he was raising so much money when it looked like he was going to lose. He's still an incumbent state senator. He still chairs some important committees, and people still need to do business with him in the state legislature.
And certainly the city will have to do business with him as well, the city administration, the new one. Okay, James, let's talk about that, because Mayor-elect Moreno has been coming out with announcements all through the week of transition team members, job searches, et cetera, what she plans on doing. So she hit the ground running, that's for sure. So why don't you sort of explain what went on this past week? Yeah,
I was at an event a couple of nights ago with Mayor-elect Moreno and former Mayor Mark Morial, who had not campaigned on her behalf during the campaign cycle, but offered just really strong words of encouragement the other night as the two appeared in front of reporters. He said that they had met privately and he'd given her advice. He urged her to hire people who are really committed to New Orleans' success and who are loyal to her agenda. And who, are not interested in catering to sort of political patronage and that kind of thing, and just really have a mission in mind. And he said that he will continue to counsel her and give her advice going forward in private. And it was a pretty striking moment, particularly after the comments that Councilmember Thomas had made, sort of suggesting that there were some forces that had aligned to give her this victory, to have a very popular, sort of respected former mayor of the city, who of course heads the National Urban League now, an influential black voting access organization, come out and offer such strong words of support and encouragement for Mayor-elect Moreno. And the message of that was the city needs to unite and move forward. And Mayor-elect Moreno has, otherwise is sort of entering her transition by advertising a website on which people can go and sign up and get updates for jobs in her administration. I'm told there's, been over 5,000 signups already, and there are fewer city workers than that in the city of New Orleans. There was a transition committee announced yesterday, which includes Cedric Richmond, former Congressman Desiree Charbonnet, former mayoral candidate and judge who campaigned with Moreno, and Emily Arata, a close ally of Moreno's. And then today they announced a hiring committee for a new CAO, which is a really key position, obviously, in city government. And you can sort of expect additional announcements on hires and the search for these city officials in the days ahead.
And I think Ryan Berger also, right?
Correct, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
You have to point out, by not having a runoff, that gives them more time to be doing that kind of thing without having to worry about the runoff.
Yeah, I talked to Mayor-elect Moreno on election night, and I asked her how it felt to have this win sort of under her belt in the primary, and she said, I'm just really glad to have an additional 30 days and not have to do all this planning in a condensed timeline between November and when she takes office in January.
And also, there's going to be a lot of public outreach too, listening tours, listening events, and also people will be able to give their comments, I think, on the surveys that she's planning too, to see what the people want to have done there in City Hall in this years to come. Okay, guys. This has been a very interesting election time. Who do you see as rising stars now coming out of this?
Well, one person I see, we didn't hear much about this person during the campaign because she didn't have any opposition, which I think speaks well for her politically, and that's Leslie Harris, who's the council member from District B. But her record was very impressive, that people were very impressed with her as a council member, and I think there are a lot of people who think highly of her in terms of future leadership. The other person who's been around for a while, but I think he has an enhanced role, is J.P. Morrell, who was reelected as council member at large, very outspoken. And I think, and as council members at large, he and Moreno were close. And so they're politically close, but he's very outspoken and very powerful. And I think Morrell is going to be a real major leader in the city.
All right. James, rising star.
Councilmember Freddie King won in the primary. He is, a district council member who hasn't been involved in some of the high-profile sort of disputes of the last two terms, but he won outright in the primary, and he controls, a really economically important sector and parts of the French Quarter and downtown area on the council. So his priorities in the next term will be ones to watch.
Okay.
My rising political star is Matthew Willard. He comes from a well-known political family. He's a Jesuit grad. He's a UNO grad. He's currently a state representative, but he won in the primary a race for councilperson at large against Alicia Boyd, another state representative. So he won a very impressive victory in the primary. He's young, he's charismatic. I would look for him in the future.
All righty, guys. Thanks a lot for discussing what happened in this election. And of course, some more races coming up next month. And a big job for our new mayor-elect Moreno. All right, guys. Thanks a lot for being here. And thank you all for joining us. We'll see you again next week from Informed Sources. Have a good evening.
Support for this program comes from the Gail and Tom Benson Charitable Foundation, committed to funding educational causes.
This program is brought to you in part by the Eugenie and Joseph Jones Family Foundation, a local foundation proud to support education, the arts, and culture in the greater New Orleans area.